All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on something that's kind of like the hidden architecture of our entire work lives. It's a process that dictates what we do, how we get hired, and even what we end up getting paid. It's called job analysis. I mean, you've been there, right? You're scrolling through job postings, and they all have these super detailed lists of duties and qualifications. But have you ever stopped to wonder, where does all that stuff actually come from? Well, as it turns out, the answer is the key to understanding how our workplaces are really built. So, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll talk about this idea of a blueprint for work. Then, we'll dig into what job analysis actually is, how companies gather all the data for it, and then, this is the fun part, how they use it to design better jobs, figure out what a job is worth, and why this whole thing is just so critical for all of us.
You know, every building needs a blueprint to get started. And in the world of work, that blueprint, it's the job description. But, and this is the key thing, that document isn't just pulled out of thin air. Nope. It's actually the final result of a much deeper, much more systematic process.
And this is that process. Job analysis is all about taking an objective, systematic look at the work itself. The tasks, the tools, the environment. The key here, and it's so important, is that it focuses on the job, not the person doing the job. That distinction is absolutely fundamental because it's what makes sure everything that comes after is fair and accurate. Okay, so what does breaking down a job into its core parts actually look like? Well, the idea itself isn't new, but why we do it, that has changed drastically over the years. Way back in the early 1900s, it was all about stopwatches and efficiency, basically making workers as productive as possible. Then, after World War II, it kind of fell out of fashion, mostly just used to figure out pay. But now, oh man, it's back in a big way. And that's because of huge concerns around things like unfair discrimination and making sure there's comparable worth. So, one single job analysis gives you two really important but different documents. First up is the job description. Think of this as the what. It lays out all the duties and responsibilities. Then you have the job specification, which is the who. It lists the skills, the knowledge, basically what a person needs to actually succeed in that role. Okay, that all sounds great in theory, right? But how do organizations actually get all this vital information? You can't just make it up. You have to go out and collect the raw data, and you have to do it right from the source.
Well, the way they collect this data is often this kind of 1-2 punch. A company might start by sending out questionnaires to a whole bunch of people doing the job. That's great for getting broad, factual data really efficiently. But then, to get the real story, they follow up with in-depth interviews, talking to both employees and their managers to get all the rich details and context that a simple survey could never capture.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Job analysis isn't just about writing stuff down and filing it away. It's an active tool for making work better. Once you have that detailed blueprint, you can actually start to redesign jobs to make them more motivating, more effective, and honestly, a lot less boring. And this breaks down the main strategies perfectly. You've got job rotation, which is pretty straightforward. You move people between different jobs to keep things fresh and build skills. Then there's job enlargement, where you add more tasks to the same job. Think of it as expanding horizontally. But the real powerhouse is job enrichment. That's a vertical expansion. It gives employees more responsibility, more freedom, and more control over their own work. And that's a huge boost for challenge and satisfaction. All right, let's get to the topic everyone's really waiting for: money. How does this blueprint we've been talking about connect to your paycheck? Well, that data from the job analysis, it's the absolute bedrock for building a pay structure that's fair and logical. The next piece of the puzzle is something called job evaluation. This process takes all that objective data we gathered and uses it to figure out the relative value of every single job in the company. It's what allows a company to compare, say, an engineering role to a marketing role and figure out how they should be paid in relation to each other. And this is why this all became such a massive deal. The source material brings up this huge controversy around comparable worth, pointing out a major pay gap for jobs that were, for all intents and purposes, comparable. You can't even start to tackle a problem like that unless you have an objective system, one based on solid job analysis and evaluation, to figure out what comparable work even means in the first place.
Okay, so let's tie all these threads together now. This whole job analysis thing, it's not just some boring administrative task. It is the absolute linchpin for pretty much every major thing that happens in human resources. Just look at this. Job analysis is literally the hub at the center of the wheel. All the data it creates, it feeds directly into everything else. Who you recruit, how you build teams, what kind of training you need, how you measure performance, and how you set pay. It's the one source of truth that everything else relies on. Because this blueprint, this foundation, it's what makes everything else actually work. Without it, your job ads are just guessing, your interview questions might be unfair, and your training programs are probably missing the point. And this is huge. It's also a company's best defense if they ever have to go to court, because it proves their decisions about hiring and pay are based on the real, objective requirements of the job itself. And that, really, is the big takeaway here. This isn't just about protecting the company or being more efficient. When a job analysis is done right, it helps create a workplace that is fundamentally fairer, puts people in roles where they can shine, and gives them a clear idea of how they can grow. It's a win for everyone. So I'm going to leave you with this question. Now that you understand the blueprint behind your own job, the duties, the skills, everything, think about it for a second. Could your job be enlarged? Could it be enriched? Now that you know how the system is supposed to work, how could your job be redesigned for the better?